everyone. Welcome to the Dr. Quack Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Quack.
And I'm the important one, Mr. Mayhem. And while this is a bad show, I picked it, but I picked it for a lot of good reasons. I picked Super Clash 3 because we did a series called Dear Independent Wrestling, and one of the things we said, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. This is a prime example of what happens when you don't do that.
Yeah, you can tell. Very good show you picked here. I am so proud of you, Mr. Mayhem. Thank you, sir. Yes, the AWA Super Clash 3 taking place in Chicago, Illinois at the UIC Pavilion.
Yes, the University of Illinois Chicago campus where the pavilion was at. Now this show, a lot of things about this show, this is considered the demise or the start of the demise of the AWA, the American Wrestling Association. They only sold 1,376 tickets. They sold 1/4 of the building. It was so bad, Vern did not pay some of the people who chose to leave and not come back. So we've always talked about when you promise your people you should have the money in hand before you sell ticket one. Vern didn't do that, and this show really started the demise of the AWA, which is sad because it was a great promotion in its day.
Yes, back in its day. Let's see. We had Lee Marshall out there.
Yeah, Lee Marshall and Ray Stevens did the play-by-play commentary. Vern came out and did 1 or 2 matches. And we had something that WCW didn't learn the lesson because we had a backstage segment guy or a host, Larry Nelson. I know you're bane of your existence, but at least he didn't spend a lot of time on the microphone.
Yes, and he was fine for his short segments.
Short segments, yes. And we had a really good ring announcer, a guy we've talked about. The ring announcer here went on to be part of WCW, Gary Michael Capetta. We also had 3 referees here, and one of them became a wrestler shortly after this. In fact, like a month after this, he started wrestling. That was Mike Enos, who teamed with Wayne Bloom and became Destruction Crew, or the Beverly Brothers. But he was a referee here with Mike Figueroa and Marty Miller.
Yep.
So if I covered all those parts, because I know since I picked it, you want me to kind of lead it.
There you go.
Did I cover it?
Yeah.
All right. So the first match here, now again, let's go to a little history first before we get into this first match.
Go ahead.
Like the other Super Clashes, this was a multitude of shows or multitude of companies that competed together. And one of the main ones on here was World Class Championship Wrestling, or WCCW. It's often now known as WCWA, which it actually became after this. And that was Fritz von Erich's company that split away from the NWA in 1986. This show took place in December of 1988. And WCCW was in trouble. So Fritz, Vince, same thing. They both had grand schemes. Fritz von Erich was selling 50% of his stakes into Vern Gagne to help him take over. And shortly after this, the deal fell apart, and the company was actually bought and merged with Jerry Lawler's company out of Memphis and became known as USWA. So we're not there yet, for those of you that remember the USWA. But there's also Continental, there's CWF, there's POW. We'll talk about POW when we get there. But there were a lot of companies trying to compete on this, but you could really tell this was the WCCW show, not the AWA show.
Yeah.
So again, to the first match, we've got the Rock and Roll RPMs, Tommy Lane, Mike Davis, and Cactus Jack taking on Hector, Chavo Classic, not Chavo Guerrero Jr., Chavo Classic, and Mondo Guerrero in a 6-man match.
Yeah, I enjoyed the match. I thought it was a solid opener. A lot of times in the 80s, they always went towards a 6-man tag. WWF was very famous for that. I enjoyed it. It was nice seeing Cactus Jack at a very young age learning the craft as he went. But the Guerreros out there, it was very solid. I went 2.5.
I went 2.5 as well. Now, I have gotten to actually wrestle Maniac Mike Davis. I wrestled him in July of 2001 in Dallas. He died in December of 2001, unfortunately, due to a heart attack. But I did get to wrestle Maniac Mike Davis. Great guy. Tommy Lane, his tag team partner, they brought in Cactus Jack later to be part of the RPMs. And this was a mishmash of styles. but they worked. It was very sloppy, but it worked. It was very lucha-driven, but I enjoyed it. I also went 2.5, and this was Mean Mike Enos did the refereeing of this, and he was not a very good referee. He was a much better wrestler than he was a referee. Yeah. All right, so the next match here for the WCCW World Class Championship Wrestling Light Heavyweight title, Eric Embry against the champion, Jeff Jarrett.
Yeah, if you ever got a chance to see Eric Embry work, that man could work, and he was great at it. Jeff Jarrett, even back then, was not that good. He didn't get much better until he finally hit the Slapnuts gimmick, because you loved that. But yeah, Eric Embry, yeah, I mean, this was very, very well put together. You could tell that he controlled this match. I went 2 3/4. I was fairly satisfied with this. It was a good set of the table. It helped things move along.
Yeah, this was a very good back and forth match. He's right. Eric Embry, when USWA became USWA, Eric Embry was the main star and the booker, and he kept that company alive for 6 years until their sponsors pulled out through no fault of Eric Embry. They pulled out because one of the people that was working the backstage, who was never a wrestler, got involved in child porn, and all the sponsors went, "We're out." And that's why USWA folded. But it wasn't because of Eric Embry. Eric Embry almost got them to be recognized as a world title by Pro Wrestling Illustrated. He was a very smart, knowledgeable man. Decent worker. I think he was a little limited working compared to his mind behind the business, kind of same of Greg Gagne, but he was still very good, very passable. I went 2.5, but I can see why. I'll bump up to 2 3/4 with you. Eric Embry won the title and became a 4-time light heavyweight champion for WCCW.
Yes, he did. Yeah, moving along here, we got a really short match here. Jimmy Valiant and Wayne Bloom.
Yeah.
You wanted to take that one? I'm just going to go ahead.
Yeah, now as we said, if you watch the AWA in 89 and 90, there was a tag team called the Destruction Crew. Wayne the Train Bloom and Mean Mike Enos. Mike Enos at this show was refereeing, and Wayne Bloom counted the lights in 16 seconds. My notes exactly are on this are why. There was no story to this match. There's no reason why, no build up to this match. It was Jimmy Valiant wanted a payday, didn't feel like working, dropped the elbow in 14 seconds, and the match was over. Come 3 weeks later, Wayne Bloom and Mike Enos formed the tag team The Destruction Crew, and 3 months after that are World Tag Team Champions, but this did nothing to help him at all.
No, yeah, this was very bad. I almost wanted to give this an incomplete, but I'm going to go 1 star just because of Mike Enos and where it led to.
Yeah. And then, I know you didn't write this down, so I'm going to mention it. We get our first sighting of a guy named Dave McLean, or David McLean. David McLean, while he was an okay wrestling mind, he was an excellent promoter. And David McLean was basically the nexus for why women's wrestling is as popular as it is. He formed companies like POW, which we're talking about. This coming on here. LPWA. Yeah. He was a sponsor behind Glow, which were all things to make women's wrestling, to make them less like the Fabulous Moolah that were not very camera friendly, and made them more camera friendly without being strippers. He did not want to exploit the women. No. He wanted them to look attractive, to draw the viewers in, and work on their wrestling skills to make them worth watching. And we get to talk today, and they talked to David McLean here, and he set up this thing that's coming on later that they kept talking about the entire show, the Lingerie Battle Royal, which it actually wasn't a Lingerie Battle Royal, but we're not there yet.
We're not there
but
yet.
I want to give it up to David McLean for really doing a good thing of trying to make women's wrestling mean something and to be respected. And they did a great job by bringing him in and actually letting him book part of the show.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything else? I know you've actually met David McLean, I believe. So, I've met him. So.
Yeah. I mean, dude, great guy, and he did a lot of great things for women's wrestling. I mean, just like you were saying.
He did. So now we're going to move on now to the WCCW Texas title. They had 3 belts. This would be the equivalent of their IC title. Mm-hmm. And this was Brickhouse Brown against Iceman King Parsons, who was the champion.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of things that you guys did not see if you were just mainly watching the WWF or you were watching the NWA. Iceman King Parsons and Brickhouse Brown. 2 really talented workers. Iceman Kane Parsons was a great heel. He knew how to work. Brickhouse Brown, did a really good job out there. If you've never seen his shoot interview, I suggest you go look it up on YouTube. It's out there. It's one of the best shoot interviews I've ever seen.
Yeah, they were both very charismatic guys. Now, Iceman King Parsons was a really big guy. He kind of, in the Texas scene, he kind of did some really what today may be seen as offensive stuff. Like he had the Rudy Poo stick. He used to hit people with the Rudy Poo stick, which is basically the big paddle like when you see in Catholic schoolgirl videos. And he would go, "Nah." So he would start to say and then edit himself, which today might not be seen very well. But Brickhouse Brown and Iceman had a lot of great matches. This wasn't one of their better ones, unfortunately. There was a little sloppiness. Brickhouse Brown had junkyard dog level charisma.
Yes.
He basically, in his shoot interview, he said he could have been a world champion. He just cared more about getting tailed than winning titles.
Yes, he did. And he's the only man in wrestling history to lose his title in the shower.
Yes. I went 2 stars. The crowd kind of lost interest in this match because it was so sloppy. Things were really botched in here. But it was nice. Iceman King Parsons retained the title. They did mention in there, and this is true, that Iceman King Parsons was the first black man to win the Texas heavyweight title. And that was a good sign that Fritz was also ahead of the times, like Cowboy Bill Watts,
yes,
of portraying the black athletes as quality talents that they are and were.
Yeah.
So moving on to the next match here. This one was a mess from the get-go. This was for the AWA Women's and Tag Team titles in an intergender 6-man match. We had Derek Dukes and Ricky Rice teaming with Women's Champion Wendy Richter against AWA Tag Champions Pat Tanaka, Paul Diamond, Bad Company with Diamond Dallas Page, and Medusa.
Yeah. I love the ending to this match. That's probably the most I'm going to talk about on it because the ending was really botched. How do you kick somebody and then miss them the second time? It was a wild finish. I get what they were trying to put over, but at least we had a very young DDP out there, didn't we?
Yeah, very, very young DDP.
Yeah.
He had just started out. His first real managing was Bad Company, Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond.
And when we talk about young, he was 33 when he started managing.
Yeah, and he definitely had 80s hair on full display.
He did.
And so anyway, this match was supposed to be whoever won the fall, their belt was the one that was on the line. But, of course, they screwed it up, and they had Wendy Richter, she pinned Medusa, and all the belts left with Ricky Rice and Derek Dukes. And DDP said the right thing. He's standing there talking to Lee Marshall, which, by the way, now that we've gotten to that point, after every match, Lee Marshall had to talk to somebody. This has been an AWA milieu that crowds have said they didn't like, and AWA kept doing it.
And if you don't know who Lee Marshall was, if you go to WCW, he used to do the hotline when Gene Okerlund got tired of it.
Yep, and he was often called Stagger Lee Marshall.
Yes, and he was always on the road with the Road Report.
Yep. But, so DDP rightfully said, "Where are the belts? What happened to the belts? Where are the belts?" And it got a little annoying, but he was right. I want to talk a little bit about Derek Dukes and Ricky Rice, because they did nothing outside of the AWA as far as wrestling is concerned. Derek Dukes, he went on to have a less than stellar boxing career. He followed the likes of Paul Roma, who got his ass kicked all the time in boxing. And Ricky Rice was around for about 4 years, and then he retired, tried his hand at acting, and now he does voiceover work, and he's actually halfway decent at that. Everybody else in here you're familiar with. I went 1.5. This match was really dumb. The ending was botched, and then it was no sold to make it even worse. So I went 1.5. It's too long.
Yeah, I went 2 stars for the ending. I guess the ending kind of helped out Medusa coming out there and leaving them finally, being smart. And then she moved up in the world, as you can tell. But now I'm going to move on to my 2-finger salute, because this match totally deserves a 2-finger salute. And I'm talking about Greg Gagne taking on Ron Garvin for the International Television Championship. And this was vacant, by the way. There's a reason why this match gets talked about in such a negative light. And I'm going to tell you what that is. The finish. Who wins a championship by countout? Who does that? Nobody. Nobody wins a championship by countout. You win the championship by pinfall or submission. Gorilla Monsoon had a million times to talk about this show, and this was one of them because this was garbage on that point. Yeah, they were fighting outside the ring, and Greg Gagne comes in at 9, and I'm like, this is trash. If you don't win a championship like this, this match for me gets 1 finger, but it gets my 2-finger salute.
There you go. So when I talked about in the open, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, there was a company around called Championship Wrestling of Alabama that appeared on the Dumont Network for a while in the 50s. They went out of business for doing this exact same finish. They had their heavyweight title held up, and it was won by a countout. The crowd hated it so much, within 6 months, they were bankrupt. And the whole thing was, it seemed underwhelming, and it devalued the title. So this match, while it was not great, at least the action was passable. It wasn't great. There was no storytelling. It was just punch, kick, botched finish. And what we mean by botched finish was they were supposed to do the cactus crossbody or the cactus clothesline. The problem is Ron Garvin is too short to go backwards over the top rope, so Greg Gagne is hanging on to the rope because neither one of them could figure out how to get themselves over the top rope backwards. So at least Ron Garvin did a good job of, he crawled out and went straight on the attack like he chose to go out there, so at least they covered it well. But, this was dumb. And then listening to Stanley Blackburn, the AWA president, trying to defend it later on, it sounded even worse. Stanley Blackburn was Jack Tunney. He basically was a figurehead. He really had no authority, so it was all Vern's idea. I went 1 1/4 only because this is probably, with the exception of Ron Garvin versus Black Bart, the time I enjoyed Ron Garvin the most, and there's not a lot of that. So I went 1 1/4, but 2-finger salute!
Yeah, you felt that one too. I understand. Vern Gagne, you were a guy that was a son of a promoter and really shouldn't have been wrestling a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah.
Moving along here
to the POW lingerie street fight. Now, the reason I said it wasn't really a lingerie street fight because nobody wore lingerie. They had David McLean, which he didn't want to do it, but they paid him a lot of money to talk about tearing the clothes off of women. Watch him tearing the clothes off of. Look, they're tearing the clothes off. Watch the women tearing the clothes off. And he didn't want to do it. It was not his thing. He wanted the talent to get over, but Vern wanted the sex sells without the action. So we had some people in here. I wrote them down, and some of these I wasn't familiar with because at this time, POW and LPWA were not trade tapes that I could get access to, and they didn't air on the West Coast, so I didn't get a lot of watching them. But the terrorist who was Palestina in Glow, she won this. Yep. With Bambi, who was Amy the Farmer's daughter, Peggy Lee Leather, who actually competed in the WWF prior to coming to the AWA. Lori Lynn, I was not familiar with. Brandy May, she'd been around all over the place, always doing the Brandy May gimmick. Malibu, who I had no familiar with. Nina, who is a Hall of Famer in the WWF. You know her as Ivory, or as she was in Glow, Tina Ferrari, and a few other names. Pocahontas I wasn't familiar with, and Luna Vachon before she had the mohawk. This is when she had a full head of hair, did not paint her face, but still spoke with the gravelly voice.
Yes.
And I hated this thing. It was... and I'm not going to blame the women on this one. I am going to blame the camera angles because the director didn't know what he was doing, so it bounced around so much I almost felt nauseous watching it. And it was because of the camera work. But the crowd didn't like it either, so I didn't like it. I went 1 star. It did lead to some other stuff with LPWA and POW getting to do some stuff on the Midwest and East Coast with closed circuit. but this did nothing to help them.
Yeah, it really didn't. I mean, I enjoyed the match. I thought it was okay. I actually went 2.5 on this because it was displaying finally women's wrestling out there. It's just it was not done the best. I mean, some of these great talents just got looked at for TNA instead of actually wrestling talents.
And some of them were actually really good. Hence, Nina or Ivory, Hall of Famer, WWF. Brandy Mays, always talked about respectively from her time in the F and in the NWA. We had Wendy Richter and Medusa Michelli on here. They're Hall of Famers. So they had a lot of women's talent out there. It's just a lot of promoters didn't know what to do with them because in the 50s, women's matches were an attraction. They were never seen as marketable. And David McLean tried to do that, but this didn't help.
No.
And then I wanted to go into this. I know you didn't write this down either. So they brought out Bill Apter, who is the senior editor for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, a very, very prestigious magazine, which is still in production today. It's just not as good because they only have the WWF to write about, so it's not as good. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to give... They have an annual thing where they...
That was... Well, go ahead.
Yeah, they have an annual thing where they have the fans vote. And unlike the PWI 500, which is kayfabe, this is not. The voting is actually real. And I want to spray this for one simple reason. Small, and I'm even going to give the Man Mountain Rock. Because they didn't bother to tell Jerry Lawler he was getting the award, so he wasn't ready.
He was not.
But it was nice to see Bill Apter there, because Bill Apter did love the AWA, and he loved wrestling. He still loves wrestling in general.
Yes.
So, I know you love the next one. The boot camp match.
Yes, and that actually gets to be my quack attack here. Because I enjoyed this match, because when you get a good boot camp match, you're getting a lot of violence. And I will tell you, when you see in the very beginning, the first bump Colonel De Beers took, he took it square on the helmet. Believe me, and he didn't wince, didn't cry about it. You would have seen people backstage today going, he stiffed me. No, they didn't do that. They took it, they went out there, and they fought. That's why this match gets my quack attack. And I gave this match 3 stars because it was quality. Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel De Beers, yes, that was what you wanted to see.
Yes, at this time, Sergeant Slaughter had just left the TV show G.I. Joe as the cartoon. But he was still known as G.I. Joe Sergeant Slaughter, taking on Colonel De Beers with Diamond Dallas Page. Now, this was a bloody match. I would have liked to have seen this match go a little longer. I went 2.5. I couldn't see 3 only because the ending they had seemed to be, a little too quick. Almost seemed like the Sheik Adnan LKC and the Iron Sheik were supposed to come in and save Colonel De Beers from getting counted out, and they missed their cue. I think they were a little slow on that. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun to watch. Slaughter was really good at the boot camp and the flag matches, fighting off the evil foreign heels.
Yes.
So I did enjoy this match. I did go 2.5. I know you're not a big fan of the Colonel De Beers gimmick in and of itself.
No, but the match was good. I'm telling you, if you need to watch it, you want to learn how to do some boot camp style matches, that's the one to watch.
There you go. And now we're going to go into the WCCW Tag Team Title match. That's why I said this show was really more about the WCCW than it was AWA. They've had more WCCW matches than AWA. And we got Michael P.S. Hayes teaming up with Steve Cox, taking on the Samoan SWAT team, Samu and Fatu, with Buddy Roberts, the Freebird Buddy Roberts. And this to me was probably, with the exception of what should have been the main event, was match of the night.
Yeah.
I went 3 stars on this one. This was a solid tag team match. The crowd was into this. Steve Cox, who wasn't really known outside of World Class and AWA, was actually a really good seller at the standpoint of there was a screw job win, and he's trying to get the crowd to chant to restart the match to the point that the referee, who was not a wrestling referee, he was a boxing commission referee, was actually playing along and asking the crowd, did they cheat? Did they cheat? He did a great job of that. I really, really liked this match. This also led to a very famous picture in Pro Wrestling Illustrated of Michael Hayes standing there holding a bottle of Jack Daniels and Kerry Von Erich standing there holding a glass of milk. A very famous picture in Pro Wrestling Illustrated because these two guys had feuded 2 years prior, and now they're on the same side.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a very good match. I'm with you on that. It helped move the show along a good 2.5. Yeah.
It was a very, very solid match. Fatu pinned P.S. Hayes to retain their titles.
Yep, definitely did. Moving along here, we had Wahoo McDaniel and Manny Fernandez in an Indian Death strap match, which basically is a strap match. You have two guys there connected at the wrist, and you must get them to all four corners.
Yes, and I like this match. Even though Wahoo was a little older at this point, he was on the tail end of his career. This match was really good. Now, this started out with IWGP Heavyweight Champion Tatsumi Fujinami in the ring. And there's a reason for that, but you have to be a purist like we are, or a nerd like our friend Jordan Drake to actually know stuff like this, that in 3 weeks, Manny Fernandez is going over to Japan to face Tatsumi Fujinami and win the IWGP title and hold it for 7 seconds before they reverse the decision, but it's still counted as a victory, and he still gets credit for holding the title.
Yes, he does.
And this match was good. Both guys bled. Gee, what a shock. Both these guys were known for bleeding.
Yes.
But it was a solid, good, well-done match. And then Fujinami coming and saving Wahoo at the end to really build that heat. I thought this was a great match. I went 3 stars on this one.
Yeah. I went 2.5 just for the simple fact of every time I watch these matches, any kind of strap match there, it's always whoever's winning this match generally gets to that fourth corner by either getting pushed into it, kicked into it. And
That's fair.
It's like, can somebody come up with something just original? I mean, you don't see that very often outside of that scenario. Like, drag the man for 4, but it's always the build-up. Like, oh, God, he kicks him over and he touched him, knocked himself out, but he wins the match.
I will say a funny story. I've done a similar type match called a dog collar match where you got a chain in between the two of them, but it's the same concept. Tag all 4 corners. Well, I picked up my opponent. I walked him around the corners, and he was tagging the corners behind me, which still counted. And as I was celebrating to tag the 4th corner, he tagged the 4th corner. So you're right. There's a lot of other ways you could do it besides being pushed in. But I still liked the match. I thought it was good.
It was good, yeah. Definitely for the blood factor. I definitely enjoyed that. And now we should be moving on to the main event, but we're not.
We're moving on to the semi-main event.
Yes. This I don't get. You know, I'll let you get into this in a second, but this match here should have been main event, and I'm talking about Kerry Von Erich and Jerry the King Lawler. The build-up, the hype, the matches they've had everywhere in Dallas and in Memphis and everywhere else. But yet, this match
was the semi, which is another milieu for AWA. They put the big, huge title in the semi, and then they have like a blow-off or another match to kind of cool the crowd down before they go home. And
it's dumb.
Now, Al Lerner was the special guest referee. He's the WGN, which is the big network that's still in TV today. In fact, they're a national syndicate. And he was the radio sports broadcaster for WGN Radio. He did the ring announcing here. And this was to merge the WCCW World title, which didn't have status, with the AWA World title that did have status. Jerry Lawler representing the AWA against Kerry Von Erich representing World Class. And this match was great, but now there are a lot of people think the referee blew this decision, and he didn't. This was the planned ending.
Yes.
Of Kerry Von Erich got busted open, was bleeding all over the place, and the referee kept checking his eye even when Von Erich was on the offense, but when he was on the defense, he never bothered to check his eye, so there's no consistency in this.
No.
And the finish was that Kerry Von Erich had the claw on Jerry Lawler. Jerry Lawler, he's fading, and then the referee looked at his eye, looked at his forehead again and goes, nope, blood's running into your eye, he's over, he can't continue. So Jerry Lawler wins on his back.
And subsequently here, this match got referenced a lot in WrestleMania 5 between Hogan and Macho Man because they kept talking about Hogan's right eye. We're not going to end the match on due to blood in the eye. Yeah, they were talking about it a lot during that show. I mean, that's why this show, I felt like WWF thought they might have been competition, but then after this show, they wanted to take shots at them, which I didn't blame them. This is competition. They wanted to make sure that World Class and AWA did not mount any offense to come up towards them to be competitive. So, yeah, this match here was great until this ending. I really feel like they screwed this up. But in the same respect, it didn't make either guy look weak because it was the referee's fault. You didn't make Kerry Von Erich look weak. You didn't make Jerry Lawler look weak. It worked. And in the rematch later, of course, Kerry Von Erich wins that AWA title and gets recognition of holding that.
Yes, he does. But at this point, the damage had already been done. Kerry Von Erich does win and does get credit for it, but it was unfortunately taken away because it was come to find out the next day he got arrested as part of his drug problems. So, yeah, I agree what they tried to do about not making either of them look weak. It's the same thing like the international international TV title. That's what they tried to do, is not make either of them look weak. The problem is they didn't do it very well. And that was something AWA, part of their demise. They were really good at building drama on television. When it came time to deliver on the big show, they weren't very good at it.
No, and this would have been my two-finger salute if it wasn't for Vern Gagne. But I still grade this match high. I think I would have went higher if it would have had an actual decision. I went 3 3/4 stars on this. I thought this was the best match ever with the worst finish.
I went 3.5 for basically the same reason. The blood was there. The action was there.
Fans were into this.
The drama was there. And the crowd really, really was into this match. I agree.
Yeah. Now we're going into the main event. Yes. The Rock and Roll Express here. Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson taking on the Stud Stable. Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden with Miss Sylvia.
Yes. Now, the reason this was the main event, I would not have made the... You're right. I'm going to give you the same look you're going to give me later. The reason this was the main event was Continental Wrestling Alliance, the CWA, which was run by Robert Fuller, only had one match on this show, and this was their match. So he paid Vern Gagne some money to put over CWA as the main event of the show. That is why this was the main event. There. Does that work for you?
Business!
So anyway, yeah, the Rock and Roll Express taking on the Stud Stable, and the winner was supposed to get a shot at the AWA World Tag Team titles. And I know you guys are all familiar with Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson. Well, let's introduce you to the Stud Stable. Robert Fuller, also known as Colonel Robert Parker and Tennessee Lee and a few other things, was actually a pretty good wrestler.
He wasn't bad.
But he was a much better talker.
Yes.
So when WWF brought him in, they didn't want him for his wrestling, partially because he was almost 50 years old. They wanted him to be a talker. And he was very good at it.
Yes.
And then his partner, or his cousin, Jimmy Golden, a.k.a. Bunkhouse Buck, a.k.a. Jack Swagger Sr., a.k.a. a few other things. He was decent. He was actually the better worker. He had all the charisma of Tiger Ali Singh.
God.
And that's not much, folks.
That's not much.
And this match ended in a double DQ or a double countout. The referee, basically, it was Mike Enos. He sucked in another match. They threw it out, but this match made no sense. This should have been the semi.
Yes.
This should have been the semi.
Yeah, I didn't even want to give this a grade. I was so disgusted just to find out there was a match after this.
Yeah, I went 2, but I agree with you because the reason I gave it a rating is something that NWA used to do after their Starcades. We got a post-show interview. That's all I'm going to say about it. It was 6 minutes of time I will never get back, so we suffered, so you don't have to. Don't watch this on the cock.
Yes, and that's the end of our show, thank God. But
So as it is, our milieu, the word of the day, milieu, which means your central theme, by the way, is bad wrestling, bad pay-per-view. So at least this one had some history that was not 1995.
Yes.
So I hope you got your 1995 out of your system.
Oh.
I'm deferring back to you because I know with WrestleMania season, and you're going to find some bad WrestleManias out there somewhere.
Yes, and that's where we're heading into. We're heading into
All
a
right,
bad WrestleMania.
Let's be positive about this because even bad WrestleManias, except for 9, have some grain of good somewhere.
You get to tell me on the next show because it's this one right here.
All right, be positive. At least there's one match in there that's good.
Well,
Even though it didn't work the way it was supposed to. Alrighty then.
I'm Dr. Quack.
And I'm excited.
We'll see you next time.
Fake smile.